Charles Koch, the Koch network, now throwing its money and influence behind Haley. Of course, the question this morning, will that be enough to reshape the race with just 7 weeks to go until the Iowa caucuses? Joining us now, civil rights attorney Maya Wiley, former deputy chief of staff to Congressman Adam Kinzinger, Maura Gillespie, and New York Times national political reporter Shane Goldmacher. So as we look at this, Shane, to you first, especially after this reporting, I mean, is this enough? Are there signs that point to it being enough to disrupt things?
I mean, I think the short answer is no, there aren't signs enough to disrupt Donald Trump. But I think this does have a big disruption in the campaign and in the primary, which is there's a primary inside the primary, which is Ron DeSantis and Nikki Haley trying to be the one anti-Trump figure. And this is a really big part of that. This is a lot of money and an important group coming in and saying, we think that at this point in time, that candidate, it's Nikki Haley. It's no longer Ron DeSantis. And that's a disruption. Now, does either of them ever get a real one-on-one with Trump? Can they catch up to Trump? That's a different question entirely.
Maura, as somebody who's been in Republican politics, look, I think the Koch brothers became kind of the Democratic boogeyman. There's a ton of money, as Shane was noting. My question right now is, it's a grassroots organization that has a ton of volunteers with it, AFP, plus the money. Mm-hmm. What kind of juice do they have in this primary? Can they end Ron DeSantis? Can they elevate Haley to be the clear number two?
I think what it shows us is that they're putting their money and their team and their volunteers behind her because, what they started telling us early this year was anyone but Trump. It can't be Trump. And so they're really doubling down on that and pointing out that Ron DeSantis is also not the choice for Republicans. And so looking at the field that's left, they chose Nikki Haley, who has the most momentum. And we have seen that her poll numbers have increased, especially after each Republican debate, which there's another one coming up. They're putting their money behind that. And I think it's telling as well that, in Iowa, Kim Reynolds, she put her support behind DeSantis. Both these scenarios did not choose Trump. And I think that's really telling for what people who have some say in the party are letting us all know that we have to move beyond this because it's forward-looking.
Isn't that the whole issue? They picked two different people, therefore making it more difficult for the anti-Trump vote to the extent it exists.
But it's important to have choices. If we continue to follow along the Trump method, we will lose. And also our democracy will lose. Our Constitution will lose. And I think people are recognizing that within the party, the real dangers that are at play here. And they're looking for any other avenue but Trump.
And part of the memo, right, was that one of the reasons we think Nikki Haley is the person to put our money behind is because they believe she can bring in some of those independents, some of those moderates who have been turned off by Donald Trump. How are Democrats, Maya, looking at this morning? Yes, we recognize the state of where things are in terms of the power of Donald Trump and where he sits this morning, but is Nikki Haley seen as a real threat?
Yeah, I'm going to go with Shane here. I think this is about the honorable mention in this campaign. I think it is interesting, and one thing that's particularly striking from the standpoint of the statement that they made about the extremism that Donald Trump represents and how Nikki Haley is the counter to that kind of flies in the face of their history of actually supporting getting Donald Trump not just elected, including, some of the work that they helped to fund in Wisconsin in 2016 and the ads that helped support him by going after Hillary Clinton. But, when you go back to the origins of why Donald Trump has been so dangerous for democracy, his lies about the election in 2020, this all goes back to the attack on voting rights that, frankly, was a signature of the Koch brothers that began, after 2008, and the efforts to make it significantly more difficult for Americans lawfully allowed to vote. And that's the origins of the Great Denial and the big lie. And that's something that we owe, frankly, to the Koch brothers and to Alex. So the roots of this very danger to democracy is essentially coming from the same folks that are now saying, oh, wait, now democracy's in danger.
Maya, to pull a piece of what you said at the top, on the statement and talking about extremism, what's striking, I think Maura gets at this a lot when we talk as well, is there are a lot of Republicans who feel that way. There's no question about it. And yet, take a listen to, I think, one of those Republicans and who he'd support between Trump or Biden.
So if it comes down to Trump and Biden, which it most likely will, you're going to vote for Trump then?
Yeah, I'm a Republican.
Okay, so you will vote for Trump. Okay.
It's not going to be Trump and Biden, I'm telling you. So
You think
here's
it will
my
be
point
another
here.
Republican and Biden?
So I will say this, and I mean this quite sincerely. The party that chooses to move on from Trump or Biden first wins.
Shane, to his first statement, and I think this isn't just a one-off quote. This isn't just him saying something that's good sound. This is at the root of everything. If you're not willing to say, if it's not Trump, I'm going to the Democrats, doesn't that undercut what Maura's talking about here, coalescing behind anybody else?
I mean, this is just an ongoing challenge for a whole slew of Republicans, right? You have the former Attorney General Bill Barr, who said that Donald Trump was, not a good president and maybe a danger to this country. But if presented a choice between Bill Barr and a Democrat, well, between Donald Trump and a Democrat, he might go back with Donald Trump again. Look, the Koch brothers are actually doing something I think pretty notable here, which is they are swallowing some major disagreements with Nikki Haley on a slew of foreign policy issues in which they disagree with her. She's a hawk and they are not. And yet they're saying we're going to put that aside for the domestic issues where we think that Donald Trump is bad for the country.
And I think it speaks to a bigger issue here is that voters do not want to have another matchup between Biden and Trump. People are very disinterested and they are unmotivated. And unmotivated voters, it's going to benefit Donald Trump. So they're looking to get somebody else in there and doing so by putting their money behind Nikki Haley.
All right, guys, stay with us. Shane, Maura, Maya, stick around. We'll be coming back to you shortly. She issues a very explicit warning saying that Republicans in the current Congress will do what Donald Trump asks no matter what. I'm very sad that America can no longer count on a body of elected Republicans to protect our republic. You've reported so much on this. Why? Why are Republicans in that place?
I mean, why is a tough question to answer, but I do think she's diagnosing the issue, which is that the party has shifted, right? The rock-ribbed conservative principles that she had are not the main principles defining the Republican Party today. It's where do you stand with Donald Trump? And he's shifted on some of those core issues. Trade has flipped, right? It was a free trade party when Cheney came about. It is no longer a free trade party. But I do think that with Trump, it's not just the policies, it's do you stand with him and are you willing to fight the left? And, the word fighter just comes up when you talk to voters and when you're traveling and on the campaign trail. Everyone wants to be a fighter, right? And they want to be a fighter for what Trump stands for and not necessarily for conservative principles. Look, Mike Pence was one of the most conservative members of Congress. He ran for president this time and got no traction. He's out of the race despite having been the vice president under Donald Trump.
Yeah, that's such a good point. Real quick.
Well, just because I think he focused on policy. And unfortunately, a large swath of the Republican voters who vote in primaries aren't concerned about policy. They're concerned about personality, and they like Donald Trump for the reasons that you just mentioned.
Shane, Maura, Maya, knowingly false or criminal were plausible and maintained in good faith.
Our panel is back with us. So when we look at this, and Maya, let's start with you on this one. They were his concerns. They were not knowingly false or criminal. They were plausible and maintained in good faith. Where does that go? Do you see it going?
Not very far when you have so much evidence demonstrating that that's simply not the case. There was so much evidence. His own campaign said, look, you're not winning this. You should not go out and announce your victory. This is a case the January 6th committee had already uncovered a lot of these facts, but this is why we're seeing so many indictments, including Georgia, as well as the federal indictment in D.C. that's saying, actually, we're looking at election crimes, fraud. This is about zero evidence. But again, what it really comes down to is an effort to say something that either party, any party in this country would have normally said if the norms of democracy had held is, no, once the voters have spoken, once you've lost 40 lawsuits, once you have Republican governors in states like Georgia, Nevada saying, no, you actually lost, once you have elected officials who are Republican in Arizona saying, no, that's not true, usually it's done. That was not the case here, as well as having violence. So it's very difficult to see how this becomes a real credible defense, but it's also incredibly difficult to see why we have a political system that's not standing up, as we've heard from Liz Cheney, that says we have democratic norms in our politics as well as in our laws that require us to act to say, yeah, that's a road too far.
More to that point, beyond the fact that this filing doesn't seem to be maintained in good faith, to quote from it, on some of the, take the other side of it, good, let's relitigate all of this. Is that not? We're going to have the same outcome. Why is that not? Okay, fine, let's do it.
Because I see it as Trump's attempt to gin up the base again, get them angry. And maybe he's seeing a dip in his poll numbers. Maybe he's seeing a dip in his fundraising because all of his money is going to legal fees. So this is an opportunity for him to remind his base that he actually won the 2020 election and to reinvigorate their anger. And to me, that is a scary thing to be proposed with, is that's the goal here. Again, it also calls into question his competency. We've been talking a lot about that, I think, just in terms of Biden versus Trump, the competency there, the age issue, age question. His relitigating this, again, after being told, by knowing it, being told by members of his own team within the White House, his former Trump officials telling him that he had lost, by doing this again, should we not question his competency again?
You know, in terms of those comments, President Biden at a fundraiser, off-camera comments last night was talking about Donald Trump, noting he hasn't stopped losing, bringing up his comments about vermin. What's interesting is you talk about competency, right? We have these conversations. Does Joe Biden need to be saying more of those things on camera and saying more of those things publicly?
I mean, what we've seen for years with Joe Biden is he sort of tests things out behind with donors where there are reporters there, but there's not cameras. And eventually it spills out. There's not really two different Joe Bidens. What he's saying behind closed doors, he ends up saying in front of the cameras eventually. So his campaign's already ramping up their Trump focus and their Trump rhetoric. I'll say I think you make a really interesting point, though, which is when you look at the legal, this is a legal filing, it's really hard to differentiate between a Trump legal filing and a Trump political document at this point, right? The campaign is part of his legal strategy. The legal strategy is part of his campaign, right? These are completely intertwined. If he is to stay out of prison, winning the presidency is one of the ways to do so. And so really, it's really important to think of these as two issues that really are one and the same.
Maya, on that point,